Hey guys, welcome to this episode of the Street Cop Training Podcast. I'm your host, founder, and CEO of Street Cop Training. My name is Dennis Benino. Today with me, a very special guest reached out to me on LinkedIn, I believe. Was it LinkedIn, Ron?
I think it was Instagram. My assistant
Instagram
reached out.
My bad.
Yes.
I would you would think that you would have reached out to me on LinkedIn.
I know.
But
I like to mix it up.
Ron Ward, who is the author of The Dirty Side of Leadership, a book that he has written. And I'll let him explain to you who he is, what his credentials are, and what his mission objective is. So, Ron, give us your, 1 minute, 90-second explanation of who you are.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for having me, number one. So early in my career, I was a deputy sheriff, and then I became a state probation and parole officer in the state of Virginia. During that time, I qualified for the U.S. karate team. So just kind of through osmosis, I began to train a lot of police officers, and that got me really interested in police work, even more on a higher level, I guess you would say. And I ended up getting a position as a United States probation and pretrial services officer. And I continued to teach defensive tactics, firearms, things like that. And we started an academy in 2005 at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center. I was hired there as an instructor, worked my way up, and ultimately in 2009, I became the division chief, the director of the academy and training. And then in 2012, I was elected chair of the Federal Law Enforcement Training Accreditation Board, which involves all the major federal law enforcement agencies in the country. It's kind of a self-policing among federal agencies to make sure that training is, excellent throughout the country. Since that time, I retired. I retired on a Friday and released my book, The Dirty Side of Leadership, on a Monday. And I started a leadership training company. It's called Forward. I use the number 4 and WARD. It's a play on my last name, Forward Operations. And it's really been an amazing journey doing leadership training.
It's awesome, man. That's really good. I like how you strategically planned your retirement on a Friday and the release of the book, and kind of feels like a little bit of an Epstein feel to it. I'm surprised you're not hung yet.
That's a great comparison, I think. I don't know about that one.
Yeah, no. Well, you know what I'm saying? Like,
I do.
I'm sure that there were a lot of things in the position that you were in, especially me being familiar with the federal system, the amount of politics really that sit in the federal system. I'm sure you had a good amount of weight in your position, but I guess that a guy like you who kind of makes its way into a position like that, to see the things that you've seen were probably the motivation for you to write this book. Is that a fair statement?
Absolutely. I do have a unique story that created my desire to write a book.
Let's hear it.
The preface of the book is the night before I have to terminate a federal agent. And I could not sleep. And I try to pull the reader in to experience this nightmare. And I found it very interesting that I had competed in martial arts tournaments throughout the country, and I'm more nervous the night before terminating this federal employee than I was in those tournaments. I had taken a lot of leadership programs and trainings. So why was I so ill-equipped for that moment? And I began to do a deep dive, and I began to realize, some either insecurities, lack of training, things like that. So I also, during that time, was mentoring some other leaders. So they would just call me with questions, and I developed a decision-making process that some people thought was extremely helpful. I developed delegation charts and communication systems, and it was stuff that I was only doing for myself, but I ended up sharing it, and people liked it. But I think The Dirty Side of Leadership is really a course on helping, from a practical standpoint, realizing there's way more to leading an organization or being a manager or being a supervisor, a training officer, than sometimes what you see in these programs. And I began to develop a courage building process that's based and rooted in law enforcement training. And I muddled my way through that termination. And in that moment, I mean, literally minutes after that was over, now I had to, walk with the person, get their belongings, all that uncomfortable stuff that you do, make sure they get in their vehicle. We had security all over the campus to make sure they leave. And after that person exited, I felt like I'd ran a marathon. I was completely exhausted. I wanted to take the rest of the day off. So that got me thinking something's not right. So I went on a journey, literally on a journey, to help leaders make uncomfortable conversations more comfortable. And I don't want to belabor this answer too long, but I developed scenario-based leadership training, and it's been extremely successful. I get emails all the time because just like in law enforcement, just like the military, we improve on what we practice. So I put people in realistic environments where you have to speak to a staff member and provide corrective feedback. And then we debrief the same way you would a scenario. In the corporate world, I call it dynamic role play. In the police world, I call it scenarios. But we ask, what did you do well? What would you do differently? And what was your anxiety level, 1 to 5? And if their anxiety level is high, I have them repeat it. But you rotate and you get all these different scenarios. You get feedback from your partner. You get feedback from instructors, facilitators. And I think out of everything I've done, I'm getting the most response out of that scenario-based leadership training.
Let me ask you this. I'll dial it back a little bit or return back to where we were maybe a few minutes ago. You said you've taken some leadership training courses and those had not prepared you for what you needed to know in leadership. So without naming a company or a person specifically, what is a good leadership training course or / book versus bad ones? And maybe you can just give examples. And by the way, I'm in this game as well, and I'm very aware of what the old way used to be and what it looks like. And namely, there are times where people in this state where I'm in New Jersey, will send me messages and say, I got sent to this person's class. I literally am considering police suicide for the first time. And he's the leadership guy for the state of New Jersey. And till we brought Captain Tom Rizzo on board with us, who does as a leadership program. But back to that question, what is some of those things? Good leadership versus bad leadership books. You tell me.
I got to tell you, I'm not just saying this. It's one of the best questions I've ever had. I've been on a lot of podcasts since I wrote the book. And I'm so itching to answer this question. When I would go to trainings, the primary thing that I wrote down was great catchphrases. Whatever you permit, you promote. And a lot of really cool theoretical leadership philosophies. Number one, there are personal dynamics in every agency. There's jargon, from police jargon, even when I was a U.S. probation officer or when I, became an executive, there's jargon that we use internally. We know, and you know this, you're a professional trainer. You've got your visual learners, you've got your auditory learners, but you've got those kinesthetic or tactical learners. And the interesting part is most people are tactile or kinesthetic learners, yet we're still doing lectures from a podium with a PowerPoint. And what happened was, and I'll get back to the training programs, and I'll make this quick, but I met a female federal probation officer. I would just walk around sometimes later in my career, and she was so nervous. She'd never shot a gun before. And as you know, our firearms instructors would prefer you've never fired a weapon because they don't want to reteach you.
Right.
So ironically, Ironically, I see her in week 6 in a scenario that was basically a lethal force scenario with non-lethal training ammunition. Oh my God, she looked like she was on a Hollywood movie. And this is the same female that was so insecure in week 1. In the final week, she looks, like she could play on a TV program. So that started the wheels thinking on leadership training. If we can take, and I know you've seen it, if we take officers on week 1 and we turn them into that, fine-tuned machine that they walk out of the academy. Now, I'm not talking about experience. I'm just talking about skill level. I thought maybe that can be incorporated into leadership training, hence the scenario-based training. But going back, I remember I took a particular training and I really loved this exercise. They handed out all the leadership books from the great leadership gurus, Stephen Covey, John Maxwell, all these books. And I'm not degrading any of that. I'm saying they had us pick out our favorite lesson in the book. And we did that and everyone liked it. And we had some great discussion. But later on, there were no real takeaways. It was just a lot of information. I would almost rather have someone for 30 minutes because we know the attention span is about 11 minutes with the average adult. I would almost rather have someone for 30 minutes. So I think what we do, we schedule long training programs that are primarily geared toward auditory and visual learners. We do not have nearly enough feedback and enough practical exercises or practical conversations about, different situations that leaders face. So I think to have an effective program, certainly you need that information, that knowledge base about what you're doing. But I think it's got to be scenario based because when let me say this, when I do trainings, I have everyone build their own, their personal goals or action plan is what I call it. Build your action plan as we go. And then I take breaks throughout and say, tell me something you're adding to your action plan, something that you can take away from this training. And by the end of the day, I trained US probation in Iowa City, Iowa. And by the time we finished the training, I went around the room and I said, please give me a different takeaway than someone else's. And there was about 15 takeaways. I also, and I'll end this, I don't think we evaluate training in a deliberate way. I think any organization, if you're going to pay for training, whether you're bringing someone in or whether you're sending your employees to training, you need to meet with them. And we won't get too in depth, but in training accreditation, we have 4 levels of evaluation. And one of them is that little form you fill out at the end of training when everyone's tired and they want to get home. Number 2 is testing. Number 3 is interviewing someone and their supervisor. And by the way, that's from Kirkpatrick. A lot of people are familiar with that training. But I think we don't evaluate training. We don't take it seriously. In other words, they just go off training. Hey, how's the training? Oh, it was good, or it was okay, or it was bad. Well, what did you like? What didn't you like? What have you applied on the job? What haven't you applied on the job? So that's the nexus, I think, for the next level of training that we have to embrace. And especially with, technology and the hybrid work situation that we're dealing with, I'm getting a lot of questions about that. So that was a long answer. Sorry about that, but I hope that sufficed.
Let's dig into this response. The last thing you just said, I have a few more questions, obviously, but the last response you said is supervisors asking their subordinates, how was training? What did you get from it? And Ron, I got to say that's sometimes very wishful thinking. We have a lot of subscribers to this podcast. I interestingly enough, I had a conversation with somebody the other day, and as a training company, that first quarter's released, and that's where we do a lot of planning, and we get a lot of revenue generation in the first quarter of every year. And namely, most people who are familiar with the process, what happens is a police department gets their training budget, and they need to spend the training budget. However, what I found is, and this is another reflection of me, is some people tasked with the duty to spend the training budget will get rid of it as fast as possible so they get that off their plate and off their desk. So if they didn't care about where they're sending people to, what they're going to, how could they care about what they actually learn from it? And that's a very common thing, just so you know, is that you will have somebody who'll go, yeah, we got 10 grand in training. Let me go to the Academy catalog. What's out there? Who wants what? Send Joey this, send Vinny to that, send Susan to this. What do we got left? 3 grand? All right, what do you got? You send them to that, send them to this, send them to that. So I think when we talk about training improving, I think we need to start having thoughtful candor about why are you choosing the training that you're choosing before you even evaluate it, and what do we know about this training? Because for me, sometimes I'm flabbergasted how some places are still spending money on things that I know are horrible training products. And that was really my motivation for creating a training company, was how bad training is. Yet there are still agencies that literally will just write a blind check. So with that being said, if they're not caring on that end, how could they care on the other end? You know what I mean? And where does that topic change? Where does that discussion begin to occur?
Dennis, you nailed it. That is definitely an important component. So I can only tell you what I did with staff at the Academy is we developed criteria for training, and we used an alliteration, and I can't cite it to you exactly, but applicable, affordable, or maybe it wasn't a total alliteration, but anyway, the impact. We had to look at the training schedule to make sure, that we were not disrupting training. But I do think you're exactly right. It starts with middle managers who, and I'm using that, term in general, or supervisors who understand the importance, and that comes from the top down. I think it has to be expressed. Do not send people to training that we know nothing about. We need to find trainings that, at least people have been before, or we look at, it's funny, we plan a vacation, we go on Yelp, we're looking at the hotel, we do all this stuff. Yes, you're right, Dennis, we send people everywhere with no real feedback. So I do think an emphasis on training starts with the top, and we want the very best training we can possibly get for our officers. So before we send someone, I want you to do some research and find out, is this training applicable and affordable and all these things. I think that's where it has to start. And I do recognize people are busy and there's no perfect world. And I say that in my book. It's easy to sit here in my comfortable chair and tell everybody all the additional things they need to do. And I recognize that. But I do think with our attitude, especially when we're talking about training, with our attitude, and we put an emphasis on it, we have deliberate conversations with middle managers. I do believe it's going to open their eyes a little bit to know, okay, officer so-and-so wants to go to the Vegas SHOT Show. Let's find out, is this something that's going to help the officer? Is it going to help the agency? And I'm not saying occasionally it's okay to think outside the box and send someone to some other training, but for the most part, we need to know it's going to have an impact. It's going to create growth. And I do want to touch on one other thing as it relates to training, and I know this will resonate with you, Dennis. I tell a humorous story. I had this person who was insecure, not trusted by their peers, but they were talented, very talented. And this person approached me, and there was this 3-month leadership program, and it even included you going off-site and doing a project with another agency. Very cool program, or at least it was very cool on paper. So this is what I jokingly say. I approve this, and I thought, this is the answer. This guy's going to get it together. I said, he left a jerk. He came back an educated jerk.
There you go.
So all of a sudden I'm in meetings and he's telling me I'm not using the latest cutting edge terminology.
Oh boy.
And so I determined—
Jerks training jerks, right?
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
I determined that in my training programs, I'm going to challenge behaviors. I did an 8-hour leadership course with 20 different contributors. And throughout that course, I challenge behaviors. When I talk about borderline narcissistic behavior, I go, hey, did you see yourself in any of these? I think we have to promote behavior change, which is we're doing some cutting edge stuff in US probation with promoting behavior change to
Right.
try to reduce recidivism. But I think we got to do that with staff when we're mentoring, when we're coaching. So
Right.
that's an important component as well.
Let me go into this next question that I have. You keep circling back around and touching on the topic of affordable. When you say affordable, I find that an interesting thing to regard because I think affordable is subjective to the person who's holding the money. Some people in maybe Alabama find training at maybe $299 a class to be unaffordable. And then maybe at a division has a training budget of $1 million, that's nothing. So how do you measure affordability versus quality?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And that's why I think it's multi-pronged to determine the quality of the training. But the reality is, you're right. I will tell you, when you're in the federal agency, you do have more money. It's a reality, because I
Yeah.
talked to some state agencies who were taking training helmets and cleaning them out and handing them to the next person behind them. We would even try to donate stuff when we could. But the reason I say affordable, it's affordable to that particular agency. Your budget. I deal with that all the time when I go out and do training programs. And so I do think that's an important component, because the bottom line is, no matter how good it is, if you can't afford it, if it's not in the budget, you can't go. So it's just kind of one of those reality checks. But in doing so, let's say you can't afford this training, I would challenge the managers, hey, find another training that's similar, find out if it's quality, and maybe we can send the person there. So
I know,
that's what I mean by affordable. It's based on the agency and
I
their budget.
find, I'm going to challenge you on this a little bit too. When we say similar, that's an interesting thing because, and again, believe me, this is just us having a conversation.
No, sure.
When I think about the space that we're in as a training company and the space and the things that we have, I will certainly agree that there are some other companies outside of our company that may have similar products that are very, very good training products. And I think that they are run intentionally with the purpose of making somebody better. And then there are other similar training products like our company that are run by complete assholes. So, when we say similar, you got to watch what you're going into. I think the affordability, one thing, and I'll tell you a quick story. A guy called me and said, we'd like to have you here. We fund it through the state. And I said, okay, what is your budget? And he gives me a budget. I said, well, I'm not coming there for that. And I just can't. It's not even, unfortunately, it's not me being fancy. The program, the company is not built at this junction for me to be able to travel to where I need to travel to procure that kind of revenue. It doesn't build that way. It's not built. We are in a 7-figure payroll at this company. It's not a humble brag or anything. It's just the truth. So he said, well, is there any other way to go about this? I said, you can hire the guy for that. You can hire the company. You can get whoever you want for that, but you're going to get what you pay for. And I'm not asking for an arm and a leg. I'm actually giving you a great deal. What I'm saying is, if you'd like somebody to show up and essentially you're going to cover their nut for $25 a person for a 1 or 2 day course, what do you think you're getting for $13.50 or $12.50 a day for training? And I'm not asking for an exuberant amount of money. I'm not crazy. I'm not unrealistic. But for us to progress as a company, we have to charge a certain fee. And I got to tell you, in my heart, I believe that it's a smoking bargain for what you get. Literally, a lot of people, I don't know if it's a majority because I don't have the statistical data, but a lot of people literally change their careers and will change the path of their careers and the course of their lives on this, sometimes considered to be maybe a steep fee, but it's not. I mean, really, all of our classes range from $175 to $299. Essentially, all are 1 day courses. Some are very long, but worth it. So, I just want to paint a clear context of not all training is equal. like I said before, there's somebody in the state that I live in that teaches leadership training. And it is literally pushing police officers to have to call cop to cop and speak to a counselor on the lunch breaks on how not to kill themselves during this person's, from what I've been told, horrific, but there's legacy behind it. Like, the dude's been doing it forever, but I've been told it's this kind of leadership training. You don't like this. This is the kind of leadership. Look for poor performance, suspensions, days off. You're going to want to look into those things, start building really start building a thing up about them, really get some paper on them, get yourself ready to fire this person. How about, hey, John, is everything okay? We noticed that, we're here for you. Like, you got something going on. Yeah, I didn't tell a lot of people this, but I got diagnosed with this. I want people to know, and it's been, all right. Not, let's set this guy up to be hung in front of the town, so that's why I just wanted to clarify the affordability thing, because I think some people in their mind might see one of our courses and go, oh my God, it's so cheap. I can't believe you guys aren't charging enough.
Yeah.
Then you go to Alabama where they make $13.50 an hour as cops, where Home Depot's a better job.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, it's a lot of money, man. It's a lot for us. Like, I get it, right? It's unfortunate that you're in in the state that pays the least in the country. How about this question? How about this? What's your one? Now, this is my last question. 3 important leadership qualities. Let's hear what your 3 top most important. I know you got 25 of them, but give me your 3 that you think are the most important leadership qualities.
Well, I have to tack on your last statement. Number one, we're on the same page on quality of training. The affordability is only one prong, and it's a reality check. In other words, somebody comes in the government, they may want to go to a $20,000 program, and it's just not in the budget. But
gotcha.
You're right. You get what you pay for.
That's right.
In most cases, even in training. But I mentioned scenario-based training. I think a leader has to be empathetic. And more so right now, because let's face it, our country is in a mess, and we can't turn a blind eye to that. People are coming out of a pandemic, and they've been through a lot of different trauma, and people, trauma resonates differently with people. Their resiliency is different levels. So I think a leader has got to be empathetic.
Would you consider empathy to be in the same category as compassionate?
I would, yes.
Okay,
and cool. And when I told you I do scenario-based training, I lace in there personal situations that need the manager to go from to switch over into empathetic. I call it active listening. You're listening for details, but then empathetic is when you switch over, because this person's in a personal hardship. This is not a pattern. This is an isolated incident, and I try to train leaders to look for those small intricacies from body language to statements and determine if they need to be more empathetic. So I think we've got to be empathetic. Number 2, we've got to be transformational. And my hat's off to all law enforcement corrections, because most of them were not afforded the opportunity to work from home during the pandemic. I'm training medical staff in 2 weeks. We're going to talk about this, but I think you got to be transformational from moving to, the controversies surrounding police, to a pandemic, to everything. We've got to be open-minded, and we've got to transform and adapt. I thought it was interesting. They interviewed 1,000 employees, and they asked them, what's the number 1 word that you want in your manager? And they said trust. Well, they interviewed 1,000 managers, and they said, what's the number 1 word you would tell other managers? They said adaptability. So we've got to be transformative right now. The world requires change, and I don't mean that in any negative way. I'm just saying we've got to transform. There's all kinds of things happening, especially with the pandemic.
Ron,
so
you know what? You gotta listen. I say a lot of things that are maybe frowned upon, tough conversations. People don't say things like that. Hey, be careful, you're going to ruffle some feathers. Well, then how would you want progression and change if we didn't put it out there and say, hey, look, this is a friggin' mess. Well, and let's get it on the table, say it's a mess, and let's start cleaning this shit up. Go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I just wanted to
No,
say
you're
that.
right. Listen, there's no perfect agency, and every agency has bad apples, bad players. It's a reality. And there's always new ideas. I don't do things the way I did 5 years ago. You know, things progress, and sometimes the world dictates that. And you're right. We have to have those difficult conversations. So empathy, transformational, and consistency. That's the three things I would point out. When I see people who are inconsistent, um, in other words, if you look at CEOs of company, you look at quality police chiefs, they're consistent. And you need a certain amount of predictability. And I don't want to confuse this with the beat cop type thing. But when I say predictability, I worked for this guy, and we would literally say, what kind of mood is he in? Because if he was in a bad mood, you sure as heck wasn't going to be asking for, to purchase something or go to training. And you got to have those emotions in check. You got to be predictable. You got to be consistent, and your employees deserve that, and people around you deserve that.
What do these three words mean to you? Seen, heard, and validated.
They mean a lot to me. I think one of the biggest mistakes I see from poor management is people do not feel seen, heard, or validated. And I think there's got to be opportunities to get feedback. I teach something called a perception gap. That's our perception of ourselves and the perception that our staffs have about us. And sometimes it's really eye-opening. People think they're doing this great job, but they're not. So I think you got to give people an opportunity to be seen. You've got to pull their talents. They may have talents that you don't know about, and that only comes through building trust and having good conversations. People have to have an opportunity to be heard, and if you don't provide, big word here, psychological safety, they're not gonna provide you with the information that you need. You got to create a safe space to get feedback. And then validated, of course, is expressing to people you are vital to the agency. I appreciate what you do. Or if someone came up with an idea that we implemented, I would put it out there. I did a weekly update, and I would say thanks to Brian, who came up with the idea to put a marquee in the hallways to help the students get to the right classroom. Things like that. I think that is so important to creating a culture, a positive culture, a culture of trust. Those three words, it would change the dynamics of an agency, what you just said, Dennis. Hey, Dennis, you are mute right now.
Can you hear me?
I can now. Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry. I don't know what happened. Might have had a little lag. So the editor will have to listen to this. I don't know what minute we're in. We're at probably minute 35. Let me just tell 35-ish so I can give my editor this. Let's continue on. Recently, I read an article about the Philadelphia Police Department is now recruiting. And to go off what you just said, they're down 700 police officers. And somebody commented on that, or maybe had posted on Facebook, and it said, here's the perfect example of I don't know what phrase they used, but it was one of those, what I would actually consider maybe even something you hear in the South. One of those like, hey, it's like a cow pissing on a flat rock type of shit, right? Like, yeah. I heard that in FLETC, by the way. There was a guy, when I went to FLETC, it was 2004, and there was a Georgia High Patrol officer who used to teach accident reconstruction. And this dude was, I mean, he was comical. He didn't say much, but he was funny as hell. And he's, his rain, he's like, man, it's like cow pissing on a flat rock out here. And I thought that was the funniest thing I ever heard. But essentially what the point they made was they are not getting it. They do not understand why they're down 700 people. They are not actually resolving this by doing a campaign and paying for paid Facebook ads to try to recruit more Philadelphia police officers. There's a reason why they're down 700, and these people continue to flee out the door, because when they're naive enough to get hired. They don't realize what they're getting themselves into until they actually get on the road. And they're shown that everything you just said is nothing that they receive. Everything we just talked about in good leadership. Now, I'm not saying it doesn't exist completely. I'm sure there's great leaders sprinkled in the mix. But from what I gather, from what I can see, from what I get back as feedback, and again, I say these things knowing that they may hear this and go, well, they're not sending 10 guys to his training. That's okay. But maybe, just maybe, if you heard this and go, maybe something isn't right here. Maybe we have enough humility to say, maybe send people to his training to figure out what we're doing wrong. Maybe we need help, because the way it's always been done here in today's day and age, with their district attorney Krasner in place, who is literally looking to charge police officers for doing their jobs, maybe there is something, and maybe we can try to offset that with showing up better here, right? We will be on your side and fight against the district attorney's office for our police officers. But where do you think an agency like that, and many of these metropolitan agencies that cannot get anybody, they can no longer sell them the bullshit to come work for them? I saw Metropolitan Police Department in DC, same thing. Where are they failing? What are they not seeing?
Yeah, well, man, you're bringing up some interesting stuff. Number one is I almost chuckle when I don't chuckle it's more sarcasm.
Right.
I see someone told me they're paying $75,000 in this precinct to get police officers. And I said, spoiler alert, they won't stay, they won't last.
Right.
You throw a little bit more money, people will suffer for a while. But in all honesty, you said the validation part. When you are criticizing or you're not standing up for the people who, you consider staff, your brothers and sisters, ever how you want to phrase it, and then you think people are just going to magically want to work for you, it's not going to happen. And everything, as John Maxwell says, rises and falls with leadership. An alarming statistic, I teach in corrections at a university, and I saw where enrollment for corrections is down 30%. Well, that's not surprising when you see people, being critiqued. People don't understand use of force. And I used to teach use of force, so it's a very sensitive topic. It's turned into literally like you're watching a sporting event to see who wins the fight. And so I do think, on a positive note, some agencies are starting to post on Facebook, Instagram, all the good things that law enforcement corrections are doing. But I think it's time to take a stand. I think every sheriff, every police chief, everyone, they need to start messaging. And let's face it, social media controls the world, especially Gen Z. And we've got to work together to paint more of a positive picture. But until we start showing that support, that allegiance, and the dedication that's required, and the nobleness of being in police or corrections, I don't think it's going to change. Money's not the answer. We know that. Money's not the answer. And then we got to win the community. We got to keep these community programs. And at the end of the day, I know a lot of cops don't like to hear this. We are to protect and serve is the second part of that. We're serving the communities. And
serve is a very broad term, right? Serve is a very broad term.
It is a broad term. And it goes back to a point you made earlier. Until we have those difficult conversations and we're able to listen, and it doesn't mean you have to do a 180, but it might be some minor adjustments. But yeah, until people are seen, heard, and validated, and we take a stand and understand the nobleness of this profession, and we begin to voice that in various capacities, I don't think it's going to change anytime soon.
I often say, if you watch the media, for example, and they go and they show up, and I'm sure you're familiar who Grady Judd is in South Florida, right? When they show up to his press conferences, or the other guy, I don't know, Wayne, off the top of my head, I can't remember, but these guys have all teamed up together. And then now they're collecting additional sheriffs in different counties because they're jumping on the board on the bandwagon with them, maybe because of notoriety, but certainly his message is clear. when they are there and they ask these, Wayne Ivey, I think is his name, the guy in Florida, the other guy, Wayne Ivey. And when they're there and the press conference, these press with their agenda, which I've been subjected to, will try to serve up some questions to try to maybe get a response they're looking to elaborate on. And these guys don't pander. You know, we couldn't shoot him enough. He pulled a gun. You pull a gun on one of our people, we're going to shoot you dead. And if they're not dead, the next guy's going to shoot you dead. If you break into a house in this county, we're telling people, keep the guns on, kill them when they come through the window. We'll take care of the rest. And so when you say that, these blood-sucking leeches in the press, they fold. What they do is they poke and prod around for the ones who will fold like a cheap chair, the spineless police leaders that will give them what they want. And it is no surprise as how fast they can find these people. And then when they find them, boy, do they exploit them and use them for their benefit. And I'll give you another example. I was interviewed by a liberal news network, which I was comfortable doing because I record it. And I reached out to them a couple of weeks later, said, you know, what are we doing with that footage? And I got no response. And I found out later on that they had found 5 police officers who gave them the answers they wanted. And the answers they wanted were, cops are bad, I work with bad apples, we're racist, da-da-da. My answers were so good and they were so truthful that they didn't want to hear from me. So it is a one-sided thing, but I guess the picture I'm painting here is, boy, having a spine and a set of kuyans, even as a woman chief or a female, I use that just because I'm not separating the two. I don't want to.
Absolutely.
Right. Having a spine, having some chops, and standing up for your men and women and acknowledging when they make a mistake, but not looking to sever their head and put it on a silver platter. Oh, that goes a long way, doesn't it?
It does. My predecessor, you mentioned women, my predecessor had the largest set of proverbial balls I've ever seen. And she took nothing from no one. She spoke the truth, how she felt. But I have been victim. I can't discuss some of the things, but as you can imagine, being in a higher level of the government, I've been involved in complaints and those kind of things. And you think the government's your friend until you don't meet their agenda. Mm-hmm. And the press, we tell our officers, we still do, the press is not your friend.
Nope.
They're not looking for a feel-good story here. They want to dig into this. And so here's another thing. We're talking about how we can change the, this dynamic and the whole culture is we who I believe in the Constitution of the United States and understand the reality. And by the way, I'm evidence-based. I'm not emotional-based. I look at things from an evidentiary standpoint. We're going to have to cancel the cancel culture. In other words, when someone is getting attacked and we know it, I think they need to see the greatest force that's ever faced the earth of people taking up. I just looked at, some very high level individuals who they're trying to cancel, but also finally I'm starting to see people come back and kind of build a wall of protection. And I think it is going to take, and when I say that, I'm talking about every gender, every race. I think people who love their country and understand that the media is trying to divide us. They're trying to create all of these false narratives. The people with common sense have got to start fighting back and pull together. And, let's voice our concerns. Let's voice our support. And this thing can be great. There's no doubt that there are so many wonderful law enforcement officers in corrections, and we have to put a spotlight on them. And, we got to get the community back. But I think that's already starting to happen. I think there's a big shift coming.
When you say common sense, there's a gentleman who is Warren Buffett's right-hand man. His name's Charlie Munger, and he calls it uncommon sense. And I think therein lies some of the problem.
Oh, that's great. I think you're right. It was common sense in 1960.
Right. It's uncommon sense now.
I agree. So I'm writing that down.
I'm full of them, Ron. Stick with me. I have all these little zingers left and right here, but I think that's a good explanation of, and I try to explain to these women and men in law enforcement that you make for good sales. Just like now, the Ukrainian conflict, which is nothing to be downplayed. And I got to tell you, I don't get upset about a lot of things. I almost lose sleep over this conflict just because I'm so compassionate for other human beings. But,
Yeah.
Now that this is going on, this is more valuable in the idea of ad sense and ad spend than a police officer's hot story at the moment. So you're off the burner at the moment. But when you can understand how the media makes money, you can understand why police have been used as pawns for the media, is because you generate revenue on a hot story. If it was a fair and impartial reporting, it wouldn't say black man gets shot by white police officer. Or you would actually hear about the black police officer that shot the white. And by the way, I'm not here expressing any side of it. I have no political agenda. I'm here to speak the truth. I have not an ounce of racist bone in my body, and I'm not on one side or the other. What I'm saying to you is look around. Look at, this is not, and again, this country, certainly we can agree that we went through a very, very difficult time in the early 1900s. 100 years ago, there was certainly a racial divide, no question about it. But the kids that'll play at my house this afternoon with my kids will be black children, right? And
Exactly.
and these are these. So what I'm saying here is, don't let them feed into something that's actually not true. I'm not sitting here and saying that there's not still remnants and issues that need to be resolved, but I think more than ever, law enforcement has been doing a tremendous job of being transparent with that. And addressing anytime it's brought up. And a lot of the stuff that we see, and you could probably agree with this, would be nipped in the bud with some good training in the beginning and throughout somebody's career. Investing into somebody as a police officer who you're expecting such great ROI on what you've picked up on a contractual level. But why are we failing to invest in these folks to help them progress and have a new understanding? And some of that's resiliency against the media. Again, I don't know if this is a question for you, but it's just this candor back and forth of, I got a funny feeling that you and I are seeing things the same way. Is that it? Would you agree?
No, we absolutely do. I do some talks on generations, the millennials, Gen Z, and Gen Z is more entitled, apologies to your younger listeners, but they're also the least racially biased individuals that's ever came on the face of the earth.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like you said, remnants of things have to be addressed in a case-by-case basis. But in large, I am in touch with so many heads of federal agencies, CEOs. They could care less on skin color. They're about the objective. And there is a concerted, and look, I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but I guarantee you, if your listeners knew how much external influence coming through other governments, Facebook, they're feeding this flame because they profit on division. And you're exactly right. I heard Morgan Freeman go, stop talking about race. And my daughter, my youngest daughter, she's got friends, and I would say, which friend is that? And finally, because I wasn't sure which one, she would say, well, the darker skinned girl, because they don't care. She could care less. She only said that to help me understand who her friend was.
Right.
And if we would leave this generation alone and stop trying to sow the seeds of hatred, things would work out fine.
They figure it out.
They would figure it out. And also, they don't really care. But we've got to help the police community to understand these things are being intentionally implanted on a daily basis. That's why you hear, anytime I hear race, my radar goes up. I'm like, oh, what's the agenda here? We are human beings. I'll tell you one thing I love about the police community is they do understand allegiance. And I'm not talking about anything illegal. I'm saying they understand, because the general public, they don't have to worry about somebody protecting them or having their back or their six, as we say. They don't have to worry about that. They sit on the couch or in the basement on the keyboard. And it's a unique situation. And I think, again, no matter what we're doing, we've got to pull together in a stronger way, and we're going to have to speak up.
One of the things that I often say in class and want to remind people of is, again, dismantling what you've been told you are or who you are, but also to look around. And one of the most amazing things about this profession is that I have worked for 3 different agencies. I have had a lot of different coworkers, and none of them will ever look the same. And one of the coolest things, and I'll namely pick my FLETC class, the 24 people that I went through the U.S. Park Police Integrated 403 training with in 2004 was, boy, if you look at that graduation picture, we had everybody, you name it, we had them. And I had never met a better group of people. So there's no organization where literally, as long as it's not being promoted by some insecure top command level who's pushing a race agenda, you will never see more camaraderie amongst different color, creeds, religions, age, sexes, decisions, LGBTQ, all that stuff. It's all accepted in law enforcement.
It
and
is. It's the
it
most
is so clear
inclusive.
as day. It really is. You see these, everybody is included. And the best part is they often razz each other about it too. And it's welcomed and it's warm and it's a lot of fun. And they are family, and it's wonderful to see.
It really is. It's an extremely close-knit, inclusive group of people, and should be the example that the media is referring to. But of course, we know that it's absolutely not. But we got to keep getting the word out,
brother. You know what, people? I'm on quite a ride as this thing progresses and grows, and some of the responsibilities that fall on my plate. And one thing I won't do is pander. And I'm never going to pander, and I'm going to constantly recite the truth. And I will never pander with the intention of getting myself ahead at the detriment of anybody else. So I don't need to take the poisoned apple. I don't need to take the forbidden fruit to push what I want to push, which I believe at the end of my life, I will look at and say, I'm glad I did it that way. I could have done it that way. Many times I could have done it that way, but I'm glad I did it this way, because I think that it'll leave more of a legacy behind. So I have a question for you, because I actually obviously am very much into leadership books and podcasts. What's your one most, I hear you talk about Maxwell. I'm very familiar with John Maxwell. What's your one best favorite leadership book you've ever read? And by the way, I'll let you mention a second one if there's actually two, but your favorite leadership book that you've read that you think is really encompassing and would help somebody. Just say Tom Rizzo's books. That's either
it's Tom Rizzo.
Yeah. Just so cheap plug for Tom Rizzo, Captain Tom Rizzo, who's probably gonna be the Chief Tom Rizzo someday, pretty soon, and I'd imagine. Tom Rizzo's book, Kamikaze, is out, and if you don't have it, you can get it on Amazon. But good. Back to you, Ron. This is about Ron today. Your favorite leadership book besides Ron's book?
I thought you were going to tell me yours, but
I don't have a book.
You
I have a favorite leadership book, I think.
Mine is Leadership: The Challenge, and there's a reason, because at the time that I read it, it breaks down. It's Kuzos and Posner, and it breaks down the very basic. Now, this is not really a high-level leadership book, but it teaches you from vision to getting buy-in. And we both know that. I always say this. We always say leaders have followers. Leaders need supporters. You need to take people from team members to teammates, to give a couple catchphrases there. But this book has simple charts that sometimes, let's face it, Dennis, you probably don't go to a leadership and you go, oh, I've never heard of that. I've never thought of that. A lot of this stuff, the foundation was laying way back from, some of the great communicators and leadership gurus early. And I always say the message doesn't change, but the method may change. And this is always serves as a reminder to me to help get buy-in, to model the way, to have a vision. So it's those fundamentals that sometimes you get so busy, like you were talking about, seen, heard, valued. You can get so busy, you don't intend to do it, but you overlook people. And they may be trying to tell you something without telling you something. And if you're intuitive and you're deliberate, you're going to pick up on that. So that book was really life-changing to me. Now, my other book is going to be a little bizarre. It's a Christian book, and it's called The Dynamics of Faith and Confession by Charles Capps.
Nothing bizarre about it.
Well, what I'm saying bizarre is the book is designed, it probably, I hear people calling it name it and claim it, grab it and blab it, those kind of things, because it is designed a little bit toward financial wealth. But what it did, and I read this literally in like 1990, it caused me to stop speaking negatives. I stopped making negative confessions. Like if you and I were buddies and you came up and go, leadership sucks, the weather's terrible, the government, I'd join right with you. I'll be like, yeah, you're right. Leadership sucks. The weather's horrible. The country's going to hell in a handbasket. I stopped that. Literally, it took me months. Now, I'm not saying I never say anything negative, but for the most part, I speak positivity, and I watch, because if you sit around and watch the news all day, and you can get yourself in a black hole and have to dig your way out. So I try to find something positive in anything. But he talks about the power of words, and he says the person who said sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. He said it was a great lie. Words have power. And faith-filled words are even more powerful. So those are two books that I consider kind of life-changing.
Here's a good, you're gonna like this question. How do you think you were perceived by the people that you led, your subordinates?
I think that is a tremendous question, Dennis, because this is part of what's in my book. I remember the first time I made a decision and someone hated it. And I realized I had this insecurity. I needed to be loved. And everyone has this image of them leading this great team and everybody's cheering them on. And, we got the vision. I think 95% of my staff would tell you I was a great leader because they bought my book. I'm in contact with them. And I always say the sign of great leadership is long-term supporters, long-term, followers, because I know a lot of leaders that have short-term, but because they're undisciplined, dishonest, all those qualities, people fall away. I think 95% of them would say I would say 95% would say a good leader. I'd say 85% would say a great leader. And I would say 5% would say a terrible leader. Imagine that.
Yeah, listen, brother, I get it. And I do everything I can when I come to this company. And I have a small little army here now working, and even as wonderful as I imagine, and the feedback that I receive from people that work here, and the thanks that I get every week, there is always still one or two, which probably makes up my 5%, that may be dealing with something personally. And I don't find it as a reflection from me, but what I say is it might not be a place for them to be here, because if you can't work with what I'm doing, I don't know where you can work, because it's humble brag with intention. This is probably the best job you'll ever have in your life. And I'd find you very hard pressed to find a better gig than working here at this company with me / for me. Like, show me the better job than this. And I mean that from somebody who is war torn and has been beat up by by bad bosses, and took notes from the good bosses, and spends a lot of time in leadership, and has to make some tough decisions, and tries to do it as very comfortably as possible. And those part of being a leader, people say to me, you got to get rid of people sometimes. I go, it's the worst thing about my job. It is the worst thing about my job, but it's part of the deal. Because if I didn't get rid of the people, and I'll go back to the last 11 people that we asked to leave here, I say, Matt, let's go through the names of people that worked here. And if they'd still work here, what do you think this company would look like? And they go, oh, I know, right. So exactly. I'm not doing favors for John's friend who's the council member. It's not a political game here. This is a small business / medium business, and that's based on a subjective of how you see it. But it is a small business in the grand scale of Fortune 500, 1,200, 100.
Sure,
for sure. We are a very, very rapidly growing company, but we're small medium business compared to others. People don't realize that's part of it too, but it can be done in a very classy way. And there'll be in the future times where I'll have to make tough decisions again, even discussing about one now, and just talking to my top level executive staff here. And they said, well, this is going to, I go, but it needs to be discussed. It won't just happen and never addressed. I will sit down and have a roundtable meeting with the 20 plus employees here and say, and they say, well, why did this happen? And I'll explain it. And they'll go, okay, now we know why it happened the way it happened. And that's what I do for them. I treat them with respect to know why decisions were made in certain areas and certain topics. I want to give a plug into Simon Sinek. Have you listened to Sinek at all?
I've not.
Oh, wow. Ron, I just changed your life.
Yeah, I'm sure you did, because I listen to podcasts all the time.
So Simon Sinek, if you go on YouTube,
I know the name, by the way.
He wrote two books that I've read. I mean, he wrote more than two books, but one book was called Start With Why. And the second one was that I've read is Leaders Eat Last. Now you can go on YouTube and watch any of his videos. So people say, hey, how do I learn to lead? Just
to redeem myself, I did read an excerpt of Leaders Eat Last. Totally. I had too many names run through my mind. Yes. Dennis, I can't hear you again.
Can you hear me now? That's why I don't.
I have to tell you one other funny thing. I pulled up my book. Yes.
Okay.
I was going to tell you one last funny thing. The reason I told you I read the excerpt of Leaders Eat Last and have intended to get it. When you have a book on Amazon, they will say, people also purchase this. And that was one of the books. So I was a little honored to be beside of that book for a little moment.
Oh, that's awesome. You could literally right now, if anybody wants to learn anything about leadership, jump on YouTube, put in Simon Sinek and watch probably 5 hours or 5 minutes. And in those 5 minutes, I guarantee you that you will find value. Because sometimes I think that I'm doing a nice job, and I in my mind, and like we're having progression here, it all makes sense. There's change, but then I look at somebody like Sinek and I go, I'm just not that smart. This guy is just, I'm smart, but there's just these people who are they are gifts to the world, and we're just thankful enough that they're sharing their gifts with us and didn't keep them to themselves. And this dude is
absolutely.
The way he processes, oh my God, I don't know if there's anything the guy has said that I didn't agree with yet.
I assure you, I will be delving into this.
That's excellent. Ron, what's the plugs? Give us the book. Where can we find the book? Where else can we find Ron Ward?
Okay. The book is on all the major book distributors, but of course, I promoted Amazon a lot more simply because, that seems to be where people are buying books now.
Or everything.
So The Dirty Side of Leadership, it's available on Amazon. If I have done this for several companies, you can purchase signed copies through my website. It's Forward Operations, but it's with a number 4 and my last name, Ward, operations.com. I do signed copies there. I have 2 programs I'm very proud of. I have an 8-hour leadership course that comes with a quiz and a participant guide and a certificate of completion. It covers the 100 dirty lessons outlined in my book. And I have a brand new interview course. I've been teaching people interview skills, to interview for a job for 15 years. I developed a system of how to transition your thoughts. And it also covers COVID. It covers salary, how to negotiate salary. It's a 30-minute course, and all of those are available on theforwardoperations.com. And I'm extremely pleased with how that interview course, it's brand new. It's only been released like 2 weeks, and it came out extremely well.
How about an audiobook? Did you record the audiobook yet, Ron?
Man, I'm starting to think you're really intuitive. I just bought a second mic, and I hired an assistant because things started getting really chaotic. And the plan is within the next couple of weeks, I'm going to be doing an audiobook.
If you get the audiobook, I'll buy it. I'm not reading it. I can't buy it.
I'm writing that down.
Yeah, Dennis will buy the book for $14.99 or whatever it is. How did you find out about street cop training?
Okay, so I hired my own consultant. I hired Jared Bull, who's amazing, because my company was at a certain level, and I knew if I wanted to go to the next level, that I was going to have to broaden my horizons and learn. This person's 32 years old and teaching me. I have a Zoom call today. But he started suggesting one of the ways, to contribute is to get on podcasts. So my assistant reached out to you. We looked at some podcasts that I thought, I've been on some, but I'd taken a break. I was just busy. I do group trainings, and I just wasn't thinking about it. So she actually sent you the information, then I responded. But yeah, we picked like 10 podcasts we thought looked really cool. I listened to some of your parts of your episodes, and we'll listen to more now that I'm a fan and you've changed my life. And I've already applied for a job, so check your email. You'll have an application. I did all that while we were talking. I mean, that should get me hired right there.
Yeah. So I dig a little deeper into the company, man. It's a pleasure to have you here. And, if there's anything I can do for you, please reach out. There are many things, if you're trying to grow a business, that I'm not a closed book, that is for sure, because I get a real rise out of people winning. And especially when somebody is just like me, has the same intentions and objectives, because I can't win this thing myself. And I don't want to see the turds rise. I'd like to see the real people rise. And unfortunately, some people don't know what turds look like because sometimes they're decorated.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah, and there's no shortage of turds in the police training industry, which is bad. And I won't name names. They make themselves very apparent of who they are. Yeah. But again, that's not what the goal is for me. I don't look left and right. It's just that I've been privy to being able to experience some of the misbehaviors of some other police training organizations, quote unquote. But I certainly am always in the business of getting involved with somebody, and I don't want anything in return of the fact that me knowing that I help somebody who is on the same path, which I believe is the righteous one, to change and mold the future of this country and law enforcement. And, you don't realize the impact you have on people, until you really sometimes get an opportunity to sit back, digress, and look at the field of seeds you've planted. And that happened for me in October of 2021 at our first conference, when we had a little over 1,000 cops show up, and I went, oh, wow, there's been a lot of work done, Wow. So our next conference will be in Nashville, Tennessee, 2023, April 23rd through the 28th. You should take a look at that because it might be a real good opportunity. I'm expecting and anticipating about 1,500 to 2,000 police officers. And the people who come to our training conferences aren't really the ones who just took a job to have a job. These are the people who this was a calling for them. And we'll have so far, right now, we have Rob O'Neill, who is the guy who killed bin Laden. He'll be a speaker there. We have Kyle Carpenter, who is the Marine who jumped on the grenade and was subsequently maimed, but given the Medal of Honor. Last conference, we had Tommy Lahren from Fox News, Dakota Meyer, Marcus Luttrell, and Tim Kennedy as keynote speakers, on top of Ralph Friedman, who's now a good pal of mine, does this podcast about every 6 weeks you want to hear some good old fashioned police work stories. This guy was a NYPD, violent crime, street crimes unit in the late 60s into the early 80s. And man, he's a tremendous person, and I'm very thankful that I get to be his pal now. And I just happened to go to his house a couple of weeks ago and spend some time with him, and his wife made food and all that shit. It was great. But anyway, man, continue to check us out, Ron. You'd be surprised what we got. We got some real cool shit. Yeah, we got some real cool stuff.
I'm going to do that. Hey, Dennis, you're doing God's work. I got to tell you. And
so were you.
I don't say this that often, but I'm so impressed with, the reasonableness that you're approaching this, but also taking a stand and making a difference. It's so needed. And yes, I'll be a fan from afar or closer. Maybe, we could talk again, but
I'm actually getting Ron Ward tattooed on my forearm today with that 4 behind, with the logo behind you. So that's how, if you think you're a fan, now I'm a fan. But listen, it's always a pleasure to get to know somebody, link up. And, I want to extend the olive branch. And I mean that. So a lot of people will say, why is this guy so like a lot of people who have been betrayed a lot will say, why is this guy so nice? Why is he always trying to do things for me? And other guys who they know, who they trust, go, because that's who he is. Yeah, don't look into it. The guy has no ulterior motives.
Yeah.
I just get a real fucking kick out of being a good human being. It really gives me a raw. You have no idea. Like people think that like when I'm nice and I do real thoughtful things and I'll keep it very bland, that there is some ulterior. It literally is actually selfish for me, because that's where I get my biggest kicks out of. Like I'm like, let me give you money when you need it, and people are like, it meant a lot to me. I'm like, if you think it meant a lot to you, you have no idea what it meant to me. And that's where I get
we may be brothers. I say that exact same thing. And I've got a lot of weaknesses, but I always celebrate other people's success. I love success stories. That's not a weakness of mine. So if anyone wants to celebrate, call me up. I'll celebrate with you. I love it.
Hey, Ron, I appreciate you being here on the podcast, and man, to a lifelong friendship. And you have us here at Street Cop Training, and check out the conference, man. And we have a Street Cop Training Facebook group. This is a plug for our organization. Follow us on Instagram. Follow us on the TikTok, where I'm doing funny stuff, but informative shit as well. Anything we can do for anybody, reach out to us, info@streetcop.com. Streetcop.com is the website. And Ron, it was a pleasure meeting you.
You as well. God bless. Thank you.
I'll talk to you.